This is the second last section of databases for ECDL, and in this video we're going to look at forms, which is the third of our 4 objects that we're looking at as part of this module and as part of databases. We've already looked at tables, which we saw was the most fundamental object, and tables are what we put our data into. And then secondly, we looked at queries, which is how we extract data from a table. We saw that we could specify criteria in our queries so that we could extract very specific data. So in this section, we're now going to look at forms, and we have one other video then after this, which will be reports, and we'll look at that in due course. For now, let's actually look at what a form is and why we might need them. I'm going to open up a database here. Just open up any database. I'll open up the houses database. And we've seen that when we open a table, by default, it is in one of the 2 views that we have for looking at tables, Datasheet View. And Datasheet View, we saw, is how we enter data into a table. I can go up to View and I can go to Design View, and Design View is where I actually design my table. It's where I put in my field names, I specify my data type, short text, long text, date, currency, number, whatever. And I can also change the properties of each field. So we saw that we could change the properties of a field. For instance, for short text, we could reduce the number of characters from the default, which was 255, down to whatever we wanted it to. So we make design changes in a table in Design View. But when it comes to actually putting data into the table, we go to Datasheet View. And this is what the view that you will use when you're actually putting data into the table. Now, if somebody is entering data into an Access database, for instance like this, and they're not particularly used to using computers, and they may not know anything about databases, they may not want to know or need to know anything about databases, this view can be a bit, daunting. If you don't know much about computers or about Access or about databases or about computer applications in general. Lots of people are just employed maybe as data entry people. Their job is to put data into a table and into a database. So this view here can be a little bit, it can be a bit daunting and be a bit scary, I guess, if you don't know much about computers. Another disadvantage is that if you have lots and lots of fields, now we don't have so many fields that they're going off the edge of the screen, but if you did, you might have many, many more fields. Probably not too many more, because then it means that you probably need to splitting your data up across multiple tables. But if you did, you'd have to scroll across. Now I can't scroll across here because I don't need to, because I can fit all of my fields on one screen. But if you had a smaller monitor than the one that that I'm working on here, you might notice that you have to scroll across, and which can be a bit cumbersome then, because you have to start scrolling across and then scrolling back and so on and so forth. So that's another potential disadvantage. But the main disadvantage is that it can be a bit daunting. It can look a bit daunting for anybody who's not used to using computers, and this can look a bit overwhelming. So for that reason, we use what are known as forms. And there is actually a form in this database already. We've seen the forms in some of the databases that we've opened up, but we've ignored them because we weren't ready to look at forms. But I'm going to double left click on the form here. You can see it over in my objects pane. I'm going to double left click on it to open it up. And you can see that we have a form. And a form in Access, in any relational database, basically serves the same purpose as a handwritten form. You fill in your details in a form. This looks a bit more user-friendly and a bit more human, I guess, because we're used to paper forms. We're used to filling in forms, by paper and mailing them back, not emailing them, but actually posting them back to wherever. So this looks a bit more human friendly and a bit more intuitive. And secondly, we can see all of the fields, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We can see the 13 fields for each record very, very easily. So it's just a bit more user-friendly in terms of actually entering data in. We still have the same number of records. We're just looking at each record individually, okay? Down here, I still have 33 records. This house data is based on the houses table. So you can see in Datasheet View for houses, I have 33 records, and in the form, I still have 33 records. Down here, we have our tools for navigating through each record at a time. So if I left click on the next record button, I can navigate through one record at a time, and I can go back. You can see down here, I'm clicking on the back record button. I can also go to the very last record, this is the last record button in the database, and I can also jump to the very first record in the database. And then when I'm ready to actually start entering a new record, I can click on the new blank record button. I can also type in, if I know specifically what record number I want to go to, let's say I know I want to go to record number 15, I can type in number 15 and that hit the enter button, and that will take me automatically to record number 15. So that's kind of the basis of forms. They show the information one record at a time, but they can display all of the fields. They do, most of the time they will display all of the fields at once on each record. So again, a bit more user friendly. We can also we can put in extra information as well in functionality, like graphics. For instance, there's a logo up here. A company might want to kind of brand their forms with their own logo or their own company, maybe motto, or any kind of other information that a company might want to put up here, like a slogan or whatever. And we can put in maybe information down here for people who are using the forms to enter data, don't enter details for properties, and so on and so forth. So we can put instructions on the form. This is all stuff that we can't do in Datasheet View in the table. All we can do here is enter in each record at a time, but we can't actually specify that certain information has to be put in a certain form, or certain information shouldn't be put in. So that's the whole purpose of forms, and that's why we have forms. Technically, it's one of the three, or one of the four objects in databases that you could probably get away without doing. You know, you could probably get away without making a form. You don't need to make a form, whereas we've seen that you do need to make a table, because unless you have a table, you're going to have a new one automatically anyway, a blank one by default when you create a database. If you don't have a table, you've nothing to put data into. And we've seen that queries are pretty vital as well, because there's not much point in having information in a table unless you can get the information out. And when we go on to look at reports in our last video, we'll see that reports are pretty important as well, because we want to get a summary of the data that's in a table. But forms, technically you could say you could probably get away without making them, but it's still important to know how to make them, and there are questions in the exam on that. So that's our introduction for forms. When we come back, we will see how to actually create forms. There are a number of different ways to create forms. This video will be slightly long, probably not as long as queries, and it's fiddly, but it's not difficult. It's just fiddly when we're actually changing the components of the form and the features of the form, when we're moving, you know, different stuff around on the page in order to kind of format our form. It's a bit fiddly, but it's not that difficult at all. So in the next section, when we come back, we'll actually look at how to create a form from scratch. Now that we know what forms are, let's look at how to create a form. There are a couple of ways that we're going to be creating forms in this chapter, but the first the first way that we're going to look at is by far the easiest, and they're known as quick forms. So let's do the following. I have the houses database open up, and remember, in our houses database we have 3 tables. We already have a form which we were looking at as well, but we're going to create our own one. And we have 3 tables: house details, houses, and location. I'm going to double left click on the house details table to open it up. And we can see that this is our datasheet view for the house details table. And if we wanted to put in new records, then we can do that down here, and we could keep on going on down along. The plus signs, of course, mean that this table is related to another table. So just a bit of a refresher there. We have sub data sheets. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to click on the Create tab, because when we want to create one of our 4 objects, we always go to the Create tab. See tables, queries, forms, and reports. We've already seen tables and queries. We only had 2 options in our queries group: Query Wizard, which we didn't look at, and Query Design, which is how we designed all of our queries. In forms, there's a lot more going on, because there are different ways that we can create forms, and more different ways, in fact, and more types of forms than queries that we can create. But for now, we're just going to left click on this button here, the Form button here. We're going to ignore all this stuff for now, and we'll just click on the Form button. And immediately what happens is a new tab opens up, and what Access has done, it is quickly created a form based on the table that I have opened. So that's how it knew how to create the form based on the house details table. It's because house details is open. So that's what Access has done. And if we look at the fields in house details, house ref, occupied, price, bedrooms, and so on, you can see house ref, occupied, price, bedrooms. Those are the fields that are included in the form. When this form was quickly created, and that's why we call them quick forms, notice that there was no input from us, the user, regarding how the form should look or anything like that. Access just automatically assumed that we wanted to include all the fields from the house details table, and it did just a minimum of formatting and processing. It just gives it a title up here, and that's it. That's all it does, and a little logo up here as well. We'll be seeing how to change this stuff very shortly. Notice that as well, it's not a blank form. The records from house details, if we look at the first record, so house reference number 1, yes, 38,000, 9 bedrooms. We can see 1, yes, 38,000, 9 bedrooms. If I go into my next record by clicking on the next record button, you can see 2, yes, 39,000, 3 bedrooms. Go back to house details, 2, yes, 39,000, 3 bedrooms, and so on. So I can navigate forwards and backwards a record at a time. And I can also go to the very last record by clicking on the last record button, or I can go back to the very first record by clicking on the first record button. So that's it. That's the form actually created. Now, when you've created a form and it shows up, now we haven't saved this form yet, we'll be doing it shortly, but when we create a form, it's going to be opened in its own tab here, and we can see it in the view pane here. We will also have these 3 new tabs, which we won't see unless we're looking at a form: Design, Arrange, and Format. And these 3 tabs contain a whole bunch of tools, as you can see, for specifying how our form should look, for formatting it, and you know, presenting it nicely, and so on, doing things like borders and so on, and lots more stuff besides. So that's it in a nutshell. I'll just show you again from scratch. Except this time I've closed down that form and I haven't saved it. This time I'm going to open up the location table, and I'm going to go to Create, and I'm going to click on Form. And this time it's created a form called Location, because that's the table that's open. That's how quick forms work. And it's included all 4 fields that are in the location table. All right. So again, I'll close down the location form, won't save it, and I'll close down the location table. So I'm going to open up house details again. I'll go back to Create, and I'll left click on Form. And again, all of the fields are put in, but we're going to pretend this time that we don't want the occupied field in there. For whatever reason, we've decided that we want to get rid of that. So we can remove fields and their labels from the form after it's been created. So to do this, we need to make sure that we're on the Design tab, and I'm going to left click on the occupied field. Now, not the label, but the field. These are the fields we call the boxes into which people will type the information, or in which the information for a current record is being displayed. These are referred to as fields. These are the labels for those fields. So I'm going to click on the occupied field, and you can see that it's selected because it's got an orange thick border around it. And I'm going to press the delete key on my keyboard. And what that does is it deletes the field and it deletes the label as well. So it deletes both of them. I've just undone that. So left click once on it again, press delete, and both of them will be deleted. So let's save this form now, because if I go to close down this form, I'm told, do you want to save changes to the design of the form? If I click on no, then the form is gone. Now I can do it in one of 3 ways. I can click on the save button here, which will bring me up my save as dialog box. I can hold down Control and S, which again will bring up my save as dialog box. Or I can click on either File and Save, or Save As. Now remember when we were saving our queries, at the beginning you can just click on File and Save, or click on your disk, or hold down Control and S, because it's a new object. In this case it's a form, or when we were looking at queries it was a new query. And that Save As box is going to pop up anyway. But if you can recall, when we were editing queries and creating a new query based on an existing query, but just with a slight change. Like remember when we were saying query by the mechanics names, query by Richard, or query by David. What we wanted to do, we were kind of creating queries based off a template, if you like. And we didn't want to click on File and Save for the new one, because we would save the query with the new details in the query with the old name, if you like. So we don't want to do that. So really I don't need to do what I'm about to do here, but just to refresh your memory. I'm going to click on File, I'm going to click on Save As, and I'm going to make sure that Save Object As is selected. And then I'm going to click on the Save As button. And I'll get to the same point anyway. I'll get to the Save As dialog box. So it's going to save this form as house details. I'm just going to left click at the end of details and type in form. And we don't need to change this. We want to save it as a form, and click OK. All right, that's it. Now if we made any other changes to this form, I could just left click on the disk here, or I could left click on File and Save, or I could hold down Control and S. But if I was to make another change to this form and I wanted to save it as something else entirely, then I would have to click on File and Save As and Save Object As and Save As. So that's the important difference. You can see there it says Copy. So it's very similar to your difference between Save and Save As when you're saving files. So just be aware of that. That's the form saved now. I can now close down the form by clicking on the X. And that's it. I'm going to close down this table as well because we're going to quickly create another new type of form. Now it's a quick form, but it's another kind of quick form. What I'll do is I'll open up the, I'll open up the houses table, and I'm going to go back to create, and this time instead of clicking on form, I'm going to go down to here to more forms, and you'll see there's a drop down arrow beside it, which means that there are other options available under more forms. And you'll see that I can create a quick different kind of form. There are 4 different kinds of quick forms that I can create here. And I'm going to click on the third one down. We'll be ignoring most of these. The only one we're really going to look at here is split form. So let's see how this works. This is a very, very useful one, because what this does is in the bottom half of the form, it's going to show us the table on which this form is based, the houses table. It's going to show us that in the bottom half of the pane, and in the top half of the pane, it's going to give us the form. Now this is quite useful because we've seen already, if I close this down, and I'll do it again from scratch in a second, but in the houses table in Datasheet View, it's very, very useful to be able to see sometimes multiple records at the same time, because you might want to quickly check back on something up here or down here when you're putting in a new record. But the problem with forms is that if I click on form based on this table, I can only see one record at a time. I can see all of my fields grouped together nice and tidily, unlike in Datasheet View where they're scattered all across here and I might need to scroll over. So that's one advantage of the form. But one disadvantage is that you can only look at one record at a time. So that can be sometimes a disadvantage. So the nice thing about split forms, if again I've got my houses table open, so I'm going to click on form. Remember, that's your quick form, your traditional quick form. But if I click on more forms and go to Datasheet, what this will do is it kind of gives me, sorry, not Datasheet, I meant to say split form. This kind of gives me the best of both worlds. It gives me my Datasheet view down here, so I can see my houses table here, and I can scroll down, up and down. The bigger your monitor, of course, the more you'll be able to see. But up here, it gives me the actual form itself. And I can navigate through like this, and the form changes up here. And what I can also do is when I get to a particular form, if somebody says Maryport, for instance, in record 9, Maryport should be 8 White Walk, what I can do is I can make changes down here, and it will be reflected up here. So that's very, very, very useful, extremely useful in fact. It kind of, as I say, it gives you the best of both worlds. It gives you your Datasheet view of the table on which the form is based down here, and then you have the actual form up here as well. All right, so that's all we'll look at for this section of the video. That's a look at how to quickly create a quick form and how to create a quick form in split view. Okay, that's what we call a split form view. Okay, table down in the bottom half and form up in the top half. So in the next section, we're going to look at the form wizard. All right, something that we didn't look at for queries. We had a query wizard, but we didn't look at it. But for this, we are going to look at form wizard because there are many more settings that we can choose in terms of formatting and appearance and style and so on. And form wizard gives us a lot more control over that. And it also gives us a lot more control over what fields to insert in our form, so that when people are filling in the form, they have X number of fields to actually work with. So I'll see you in the next section where we'll look at the form wizard. In the last section, we saw how to create a form known as a quick form using just the form button in the forms group on the create tab. We also saw how to create what was known as a split form, which gave us a split window. It gave us the form in the top section, and then it showed us the records from the table on which the form was based or built in the bottom half of the window. It kind of gives you the best of both worlds. In this section, we're going to look at how to create a form using what's known as the form wizard. There was a wizard for the query section as well in the queries group on the create tab, but we didn't look at it. We created all of our queries using query design. We are going to look at the form wizard. Don't forget, a wizard in computer terminology is a kind of, it's a feature of a program that guides the user through something, like through the installation of maybe a computer program or setting up a printer or something like that. and it's kind of, you'll see the sequence of steps, next, 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 and you can go backwards in time as well. You can click on previous and so on and so forth. So I've got the create tab. I've got my houses database first of all open up. I don't have any tables open because unlike when I'm selecting form, which needs a table open or a table selected in order to create the form based on that table, it doesn't matter what I have selected here, and it doesn't matter if I have nothing open. So I've got nothing open here. I have no objects open here, and I'm going to left click once on Form Wizard. And we get up the following dialog box, and this is the first step in the wizard. So remember, wizards usually consist of a dialog box, and we have next at the bottom, and then we'll have back, and so on and so forth. And at any time we can cancel the process as well. So the very first thing that Access is asking you is, what do you want to base your form on? Now remember, when we clicked on form, it was a quick form that was based on the table that was selected or open, and everything was put into the form. We had no user input really at all, which is fine for a lot of the forms that we'll be creating when we just want to quickly create a form, but it takes a lot of control away from us. The form wizard now is going to give that control back to us. So the very first thing that we're being asked for is, what are we basing the form on? We can base it on any one of the tables that we have in our database. So if I click on the down arrow here, I can see house details, houses, and location. Those are my three tables. What I'm going to base it on is, I'm going to base it on the houses table. So I'm going to left click on the houses table. And note when I did that the number of fields here changed to reflect the fields that are in the houses table. Obviously, if you clicked on house details, you'd get the fields that were available for that table, and location, you get the fields that are available for that. But I'm going to go with houses. And what I want to do is I want to move across the fields that I'm interested in. Now, this is where, again, you can fine-tune exactly what fields that you want in your form. The quick form just puts them all on the form. What I can do in this case is I can move across one field. We'll have seen something similar to this before in mail merge in Word. The prospect, or rather the ability to move across fields using either the single, or we can move them all across using the double arrows. So for instance, here are the available fields, and I want to make these available fields the selected fields that I'm going to include in my form. So I can left click on the first field, and I can click on the arrow like that to move it across. Then I could, the next field is automatically selected for me, and then I could then move that across, and so on and so forth. If I decide that I want to remove any of these fields, I can simply left click on the field over here in selected fields. In other words, these are the fields that will appear in the form, and I can move them back by clicking on the right arrow, and again clicking on the right arrow. Hopefully you might remember from mail merge in Word that if we want to move all of the fields across, we can move them all across by clicking on the double arrow, the double right arrow. In other words, move them across. And if I want to move them all back, I can move them all back. So it's very, very flexible. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to move them all across. A lot of the time, if there are fields in a table, chances are you're probably going to want to have those fields available on the form, because after all, you want people to be able to put information for that field for each record. So I'm going to move them across, all of them across. There will be exceptions to that rule, but most of the time you'll want to include them all. So that's the first step in the wizard done. We can now click on the next button. And don't forget, you can click on back then if you decided, hang on, no, I shouldn't have included this or that. But we won't do that. We'll just we'll pretend that we're happy with this. And we click on next. Now the layout for the form, this will make more sense when we actually see the form created in the flesh, as it were. The default layout for your form is going to be known as columnar. You do have other options. You've got tabular, datasheet, and justified, but they're less used. They still are used, but they're still less used than columnar. It's a word I can never pronounce properly, columnar. So we're going to leave that set, okay? We're not going to change it. And again, you'll see exactly what it looks like when we actually have the form created. That's all we have to do on this section. So let's click on next. What title do you want for your form? Well, here's where we can actually enter in a name for the form. It's going to call it default houses. It's going to base the suggested name of the form on the table that we're basing the form on. I'm not going to call it that. I want to call it something a lot better than that. So I'm going to call it houses form. Now I know I already have a house data form in there, but just ignore that. I'm going to call this houses form, okay? And we have two options here. We have open the form to view or enter information, or modify the form's design. I'm going to leave open the form to view or enter information. And that is it. That's it. You can go back at any stage and change any of these steps or decisions. None of them are set in stone. But if you're happy with everything, you can now click on the finish button and we get up what looks very similar to what we had in the form which existed as part of this database when we opened it up. So the 33 records, well, I have 33 records, are down here. I can go to the last one, I can go to the first one, and I can navigate around like this. And that's it. That's all we have to do when we're creating a form using the form design. I can close this form down. It was saved automatically for me when I gave it the name house form, unlike the quick form where I had to save it using a name when I went to close it. But that's all there is to using the form wizard. Now, what we're going to look at is some kind of more fine-tuned, granular approaches now to creating a form. But using the form wizard really isn't all that much more complicated. There were just two things basically that we had the option to specify that we didn't have in the other, the quick form one. And if I go back into form wizard, and if I just quickly go to houses again, the first option was what fields we wanted to include. The quick form puts all of them in. It doesn't ask you. Using the form wizard, you can decide which fields that you want to put in. I'm just going to put them all in. And the second one was the layout for your form. Again, columnar is the default one. That's the one you're going to be using most of the time. But there might be other occasions, we'll look at them, where you might want tabular or datasheet or justified. But those are the only two, the two design options that you're asked about when you're using form wizard. In the next section we're going to look, it's going to be much more fine-tuned and a little bit more fiddly. Unfortunately, it's not difficult, it's just fiddly, where we actually look at form design, very similar to query design in that we're literally designing it from the ground up, and Access is assuming nothing at all. It's just going to make us choose everything and make every decision, but you have an awful lot more control. So we'll see in the next section for designing a form. In this section, we'll look at how to design a form from scratch. We can create forms manually from fields that are in our tables, or queries in fact, but we'll only be doing it based on tables. And we have two views when we're designing a form. We have layout view and design view. What layout view allows you to do is assemble the form while the actual data from the fields is being displayed in the form. And that's very useful when you're setting, let's say, field sizes. So you can see in real time how, let's say, changing the size of a field might affect the data. And then in design view, only what are known as field definitions are shown. But the form layout is shown in a lot more detail, and a greater range of changes are possible. So we'll see both of these views when we're actually designing the form. I should note now that creating a form manually isn't part of the requirement for this module. That clicking sound I can hear right now is probably everybody closing down this video if you figured that you don't need to know it. And it's true, you don't need to know it for the exam. But I'd recommend that you watch the video anyway, though, because even though it's not part of the requirement for the module, it's a good introduction to let's say, the steps involved in designing a form from scratch. And you never know, you might need to know it in future if you go on to do advanced ECDL. I think it might be in that, or advanced, any form of advanced access course. Or if you do another course that features databases, it might come up, or just in your work, if somebody elects you to be in charge of databases or in charge of maintaining databases, it's handy to know. It's handy to know how to design a form from scratch. So we'll look at it in this section. We'll get through it as quickly as we can anyway. It's not difficult, but it is fiddly. It is a little bit fiddly. So I'm going to open up a database here, and I will open up the mailing database. I think we used it in one previous video. And again, I'm going to click in the Create tab, and it doesn't matter, I don't need to have a table selected or a table open as I did in blank form, as you'll see in a second. Now I'm not going to click on Form Design, because what that will do is, well, you'll see I'll explain the change, or explain the difference in a second. I'm just going to click on blank form. Okay, I clicked on Create and I clicked on blank form, and a blank form opens up like this. All right, a blank form. And as you can see, there's nothing on it. It's a completely blank page. Over here in the right hand side, you should see field list. All right, you should see field list, and you should see the tables that are actually included in this database. You can see them over here in the objects pane. I have mailing and I have new mail, and you can see them over here as well. If for some reason no tables are listed, you might see show all tables. There might be a show all tables link here, and you'd need to click that, and then you would see your tables. All right, but I can see them here. I can see mailing and new mail. So this is where I decide what table I want to base this form on. If I click on the plus sign, I can see all of the fields that are in the mailing table. And I'm just going to open up the mailing table, and I'm going to leave it open as well so that we can kind of compare and contrast. We can see what's happening and what the form, the blank form, is pulling from the mailing table. So you can see in the mailing table name, address 1, address 2, address 3, and so on. Back in form, in the form layout view, in our form design, we can see when I click on the plus button to expand the field list for the mailing table, there's name, address 1, address 2, and so on and so forth. So what I want to do now is decide which which fields I want to include on this blank form. It's very easy to do. All you do is double left click on the field name that you want. So I'm going to double left click on name, and you can see that the name label has been put in, and also the first record for that field. If I go back to mailing, you can see Nigel Keith is the very first record. First field is Nigel Keith for the first record, and that's been put in. And that's what I meant a few seconds ago when I said that this is layout view, and this allows us to assemble and design the form while the actual data is displayed. So it's very useful for seeing exactly in real time how our form is going to look with data in it. Does it fit inside the fields? I'm not going to include all of these. I'm just going to skip. I'm going to go down to department and double left click on it to give you an example of how useful this can be. You can see right now that the label is not wide enough for department. We can only see depart. In fact, we can't even see all of the T. So we'll be showing you how to fix that shortly. All right. Then we can double click, left click on town. You can put them in any order that you want. And again, town Brighton. If I go back to mailing, you can see that Brighton is put in for the first record. Department is blank for the first record, which is why it's blank here as well. Okay, so I'm going to close this down. I'm going to close down this form, and I'm not going to save it. Okay, I'm not going to save it. Instead, what I'm going to do is select create again. I'm still in there, and this time I'm going to click on form design. Now this looks horrendous, admittedly, but it's really not that bad. It's really not that bad. When I click on form design, I get the following. This is design view. This is different from layout view. Now again, we're going to have our field list over here on the right hand side. And again, I'm going to expand the mailing list because I'm going to base this form on the mailing table. Again, if you don't see the field list over on the right hand side, just click on, you should see show all tables, and then you'll see it. So what I want to do here now in design view is there's a couple of things I'm going to do. I'm going to move my mouse pointer over the bottom of the grid, of the form grid, and you can see my mouse is changing to a double-headed arrow up and down. When I'm over that line, it means that I can hold my mouse button down and I can drag the form down. Okay, so I'm going to change its shape. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it down until it's roughly, let's see, roughly 13. I think these are centimeters or inches. I can never tell the difference between centimeters and millimeters. I can only work in inches, but it's at 13. I think it's probably centimeters. So I'll do it until it's roughly 13. Actually, no, I'm going to do the following. I'm going to do it until it's roughly 7 centimeters or whatever it is wide. And then on the right hand side, again, I have a line here. If I hover my mouse over it, I can click and drag and I'll make it roughly 13. So it's now roughly 13 by 7. And the rulers here as a guide. You can see it's 13 here and it's 7 here. That's what I'm using as a guide. Again, very similar to the way we did it just a couple of minutes ago in blank form when we were starting with a completely blank form. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the field list, and instead of double left clicking, I'm going to hold my mouse button down, left click and hold my mouse button down on name, and I'm going to drag it into the grid. And I'm not releasing my mouse button yet because I'm going to release it roughly, can you see this, the line between 3 and 4, that's roughly around the 3.5 centimeters. And I'm going to release my mouse. What that does is it positions the field at 3.5. The label will be over here, okay? But the field itself, which is a really important bit, is going to be at 3.5. I'm going to do the same with department. I'm going to hold my mouse button down on department, keep my mouse button held down, and I'm going to drag that over as well. And I'm going to put it to the right of name. So can you see where I am here? I'm roughly at the 10 centimeter mark, and I'm going to release. And again, the label is placed. Access fits it in as best as it can. So it puts the label and it puts the field. So note that it's the field that now, again, that's being positioned, not the label. The label is going to be positioned offset from the field, and Access is going to take care of that for you. But you need to leave enough room, you need to kind of gauge enough room so that you will have enough space and that it doesn't overlap the other one. It's easy to fix it if it does, but it's easier just to kind of position it from the beginning. Now I'm going to go to the second field in the list, Address 1. And I'm going to left click once in it, and what I want to do is I want to select more than one. Okay, I want to select Address 1 down as far as postcode. So remember our shift key trick when we were selecting multiple adjacent items, meaning items that are next to each other. I've got my first item selected, I'm holding down shift, and I'm going to go down as far as postcode and left click once. And you can see that Address 2, Address 3 and so on, all of them, Address 1 and postcode, the first and last are selected, and everything in between is selected as well. Now what I can do is I can left click on any of these at all because they're all selected. It's a block. And I'm going to drag them over and I'm going to release roughly, it doesn't matter where, roughly in the center of the form. Roughly. I'm going to release here and see what it looks like. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So your form should look kind of similar to what I've got on the screen now. Don't worry if it doesn't look exactly. You don't have to fine tune it. Just as long as it looks roughly similar to mine. All right. So we are in Design View at the moment. Okay, we're in Design View. What I want to do now is I want to switch to Layout View. Because remember, in Layout View, we can assemble our form while the actual data is being displayed. Design View is a lot fussier, it's a lot more fiddly. Only the field definitions, this is what I mean by the field definitions. None of the data from these fields, from the table, is being pulled in. Only the field definitions are being shown, and which is very useful for setting field sizes and so on. But none of the actual records are being pulled in. So what I want to do now is I want to switch to Design View. Sorry, I beg your pardon, Layout View. So you'll find up on the status bar, if you look down, there's a number of ways you can do this, but down on the status bar, remember the status bar for all Office applications is down on the bottom of the screen, and you can quickly change from Datasheet View, Layout View, and so on and so forth, and Design View. You can just about see right down here in the right hand corner, I've got, I'm in Design View, so it's currently shaded. I want to go to Layout View. So if I hover my mouse button over it, you'll see that it says Layout View. So I'm going to left click once to go to Layout View. And now I'm in Layout View. You can see, this is what I meant a second ago when I said it's useful for assembling your form, because the data is being pulled in from the fields. So I can actually see the record now being pulled in, the fields from the first record being pulled in. So in Layout View now, I can actually start to change the layout as well, because it doesn't look great. So what I want to do is I want to move the address field. I want to move the address field. And the first thing I want to do is I want to make the address field larger. So the trick here is to click on the field, not the label, but the field. These are the labels, but these are our actual fields into which the data is being pulled. And I'm going to click and drag on the right edge of it. This is very similar to when we were reshaping and resizing images and objects in Word. You can do it from the top, and do it from the side, and you can do it from diagonally. I'm going to click on the right edge. I don't want to make it taller, I just want to make it longer. So I'm going to left click and I'm going to drag it to enlarge, roughly that much. And I want to do the same for the others as well. And there is a shortcut as well for doing this, but I'll show it to you at a later stage. So I want to make them all roughly the same size. Consistency is the key here. You want everything to look the same. It looks professional. Now I've decided I want to, let's see, I'm going to put a department in as well. So I'm going to left click and drag department in as well. Now when I did that, you can see that I accidentally placed it over the name. So what I want to do now is hover my mouse over the department. You can see it's a four-headed arrow now, which means that I can click and I can drag it down to where I meant to put it. Roughly there. Now it doesn't look great there, so I've decided I want to delete it. So it's very easy to delete a field. All you do is left click once on the field, all right? Once on the field. And what you can do then is you can press your delete key, and that gets rid of the field and the label. Gets rid of the field and the label. We can also position our labels closer as well. So you can see that name is miles away from the name field. So what you can do is hover your mouse in the middle of the field. Don't hover it over the lines, or Access will think you want to resize the label. I'm going to hover it in the middle of the label. I'm going to hold my mouse button down, and you can see that I can drag it closer to its accompanying label. So that's all you need to do there. Hover your mouse in the middle of the label, hold your mouse button down, and drag it in until it's not too close, but not too far away either. Let's see. So that's all I'll do for now in this particular section. What I want to do now is save this form. Okay, if I go to close this down, I'll be prompted to save it, because if I click no, I'm going to lose it. So again, it's exactly the same as with queries and exactly the same as with the blank forms as that we were doing. I can click on the save button, I can right click here, I can go to save, I can go to file and save, or save as. It doesn't make a difference at the moment because it's a brand new blank form. I could hold down Control and S. I'll just click on the save button up here. And I have a save as box, and it's asking me what do I want to name it as, or what do I want to call it as. Note that it's not asking me what type of object, because it's just going to be a form. So it differs slightly. This, doing it in design form, because you're designing it specifically as a form, it knows that it's only going to be saved as a form, which is not why it's asking us what object do we want to save it as. And I'll call it, I'll just call it addresses. I'll just call it addresses, and I'll left click OK. And that's it. That form is now available for use for subsequent sections. So if you are following along with this video, just make sure that you've done roughly what I've done here, and make sure that you've saved the form as addresses, because you're going to need that in the next section. You're going to need this form that we've just created called addresses in the next section. So I'll see you in the next section when we look at how to edit an existing form design. We're going to see how to edit this. In this section, we're going to look at how to edit an existing form design. In the previous section of the video, we looked at how to create a blank form from scratch. There was literally nothing on the form, and we did it ourselves from scratch. So now we're going to look at how to edit that form design. If you can remember from the last section, we called it addresses. We saved that form object as addresses. So I'm going to double left click on it to open it up, and then it opens up obviously in form view, and we could navigate through each individual record from the mailing table, because that's the table that the addresses form is based on. However, I want to right click on this, and I want to go to design view, and this brings us back to that grid view. When you see the grid view at the beginning, it looks horrible, but really the grid lines are there to help you out. They're there to give you an idea of exactly where you are placing things in relation to everything else and in relation to the form itself. So the grid lines are very useful. And you have your ruler up here as well, and down here as well for fine-tuning things. Now, we're not going to get too fiddly or finicky with placing things, but just give you an idea that that's what it's there for. You have these three tabs up here: design, arrange, and format, which you'll always see when you have a form open. You have the ability to design, arrange things, or format things that are on it. So I'm going to click on the format tab. Now, strictly speaking, I don't need to do this, because I'm doing it to show you that you can select all. There is a selection group under the format tab, and there's a select all button, which will select all of the elements on the form. In other words, every single field and its accompanying label. You don't really need to do that though. I've left clicked away to unselect it or deselect everything. And if you'll recall our keyboard shortcut from our Computer Essentials days, when we held down Control and A, that's a keyboard shortcut that works in Access as well, and it will select everything on the current object that you're working on. In this case, I have my addresses object open here, so holding down Control and A will select all of the elements that make up that form. That goes back to what I was saying in the beginning, in the very, very beginning, in fact, of the course, that there are certain things that you're going to learn when you're using a computer that you can carry over into other areas. It's not constantly learning new information all the time. And keyboard shortcuts are a good example of that. Control A will do this for us in Access. It contains or selects all of the elements in an object or in a form that I have, for instance, in this example, open. But if you had Microsoft Excel, it would Control and A would select an entire worksheet. If you had a Word document open, Control and A would select everything, in fact, in the document, not just text, but pictures and objects and shapes and tables and anything else you might have. If you had a folder open in File Explorer in Windows, Control and A would then select all of the files in that folder and any subfolders, basically everything in the folder. So again, it's just using information that we already have and just carrying it over into a new domain, if you like. So uh, when you want to select everything, you don't need to go to Format because you already know the keyboard shortcut for it. So we're back to Design, Control and A, and everything is selected. When everything is selected, what you can do is you can move everything en masse. As you can see, I'm left clicking anywhere on anything that's selected. Everything is kind of treated as one block, and I can then move everything around by holding down my mouse button and dragging the mouse. It's much easier than clicking and dragging and moving things individually. If I'm happy with where everything is placed in relation to everything else, what I can then do is move everything in relation to, let's say, the top of the form or the side of the form or up from the bottom of the form, rather than doing them piecemeal. Very similar to when we grouped, if you remember, we grouped objects and shapes together in Word, and then we could move them, and in PowerPoint we did it too, and we could move them then as one group. Okay, so that's all there is to selecting all, just Control and A. It also is under the Format tab, Selection, Select All, but you don't need to do that if you don't want to, and if you don't need to, you don't have to go off whatever tab that you're on. You can just hold down Control and A. Now what we'll look at is headers and footers. We can actually insert a header and a footer into a form as well. It's very easy to do, and we're only going to be doing the basics for headers and footers. How do we get to it? Well, there are a number of ways, but probably the easiest way is to simply right-click anywhere on the form grid. Don't right-click on a field, or you'll get a different pop-up menu, or a label, you'll get a different pop-up menu. I want to right-click on the grid itself and go down to Form, Header and Footer. Not Page Header and Footer, but Form, Header and Footer. And this section of the form and this section of the form open up. Header and a footer. Header goes at the top, footer goes at the bottom. Exactly the same principle as headers and footers in Word or in Excel or in PowerPoint as well when we did them. In this particular case, however, the header and footer is going to appear at the top and bottom of every record that we navigate through via a form. So every record that's in the mailing table, when we're in form view and we navigate through each record, we'll see that whatever we put in the header and the footer will be at the top and bottom of each record. We'll see it in a second. What are we going to put in it? Well, there's tons of things we can put in headers and footers. We're only going to look at this one here. This is called a label. It's under the Design tab. Again, Design, Arrange and Format are the three tabs that you have when you're working with forms. Under the Design tab in the Controls group, if you hover your mouse over this guy here, it's a capital A and a small a. That's a label. Think of it very, very similar to a text box in Word. It's simply a text label. So I'm going to left click on that and come right into my form header, and roughly around here I'm going to hold down my mouse button and click and drag, just like you would with a text box in Word, and then release. Don't worry about making it exactly the same size as mine, as long as it's roughly similar. And once your label has been created, you can now type something into the label. All right. So what will we type in? We'll type in the following: CIA addresses, which is the text that they're using from the example in the book. CIA addresses. All right, with that done, what we can now do is click outside the box. And if we need to select the box again, we click anywhere inside it, and you can see that a thick orange border surrounds the label, and we have sizing handles on it. Now this is the same for down in the details section of the form. When we click on each individual field or a label, we'll see that an orange border surrounds the field or the label, and they have sizing handles on it as well. This is the detail section of the form. This is what we would always see. The detail section means that this is where the details or the records from the table that this form is based on are placed. So this is the detail section of the form, and obviously then this is the header and the footer. So the same principle applies when you click on an object that you've placed into the header or the footer. You get a thick orange border around it, and you have your sizing handles. So very similar to when we reshaped and resized shapes and images and objects in Word and in Excel as well. Sorry, not Excel, in PowerPoint. Well, we did look at how to resize charts as well in Excel. So the same principle, sizing handles. I can hover my mouse over any of the sizing handles, and when my mouse pointer changes into a double-headed arrow, I can then click and drag. So I can do it from the top, bottom, or from the corners, like this. Okay, I'm just going to do it from the bottom corner. I'm going to make it roughly that big. So it's going from this line here, 4 to 10. So that's why the lines are useful as well. So the rulers are useful too, but the lines running down, obviously, and the lines running across in the grid for the header, the detail, and the footer make it easier to see exactly what measurement you're at. So I'm at 4 to 10. So that's roughly 6, whatever the hell these are. Millimeters, centimeters, I don't know. Centimeters, I'm pretty sure. And then well, I won't worry too much about the height, as long as it's tall enough for us to see the actual text. Okay, so left click away. Now I still can't really see the text properly, so if I left click again on CIA addresses, on the label that contains the text CIA addresses, I've decided that I want to format these. I want to format the text that's in my label. So if I click on the Format tab, I can now have access to all of the font formatting that you'd be familiar with from Word and from Excel and from PowerPoint as well. And I don't need to select the text or have my cursor blinking on it. All I need to do is have the label selected like this, and then anything that I click on up here in the font group will be applied to text in that label. So I'm going to bold it. I'll change the color. I might as well make it a bit bigger because it's a bit small. It's a header, so headers are normally a bit bigger. Let's make it 16. I'm going to change the font as well, so I'll change it from Calibri Detail to Arial Black. And finally I'll center align it. Now when you center align something, it center aligns it relative to the label itself, not relative to the actual header. But because I've sized my header to be exactly in the center of the header itself, the label is exactly positioned within the center of the header, then when I center align text in that label, it's going to be center aligned within the header too, because one is centered in the other. That's it. Yeah, that's all I'm going to do for the header and for the label in the header. I'm going to put another label in the footer, exactly the same sequence of steps. Just make sure you left click on form footer first of all to select it, and then go back to design, and let's go to label, and let's make it the same width and roughly the same height, roughly. So 4 to 10, like that. Consistency is important. And let's see, what will we do? We'll type in something like this, confidential. You might want that at the bottom of each record. And I will center align it, so I want to format, and I want to... Now notice I have no access to any of my font formatting because the cursor is still blinking in the text in the label. So I need to left click out of it, and now when I left click on the label box, I can center align, and I'll make it red as well. And I'll just make it a little bit bigger. I'll make it 12, and I'll bold it too. And that's it. I'm going to save the changes to this form by clicking on save. I don't need to save as, because it's an existing object with an existing name, so I'm just saving the design changes that I've done to it or made to it. Let's have a look at what this would look like in form view. So when somebody is actually using the form, down here in the bottom right hand corner in my views, I'm in design view. I'm going to click on form view, and that's it. That's all there is to it. And if I left click forward and backwards like that, you can see that every record in the form that's being pulled from the mailing table has CIA addresses and confidential down here. That's all. That's all there is to it. That's all that we need to look at in terms of editing a form design. You can right click and go back to design view. There's lots more things you could put in. There are links that you can put into documents. There's browser controls. There's things for options. There's things for attachments. You can put in an image and so on and so forth. Don't worry about any of that, okay? Don't worry about any of that. All we needed to look at was basic editing in terms of moving the fields and then inserting a header and a footer, okay? So the next section, what we'll look at are sorting and editing records. Because if I go back to form view, you'll see that I can. Obviously, I can go backwards and forwards through my forms or my records via the form, but I can also sort and edit records as well through the forms, which is, again, maybe slightly easier than doing it and maybe more user-friendly than doing it in Datasheet View like this. I can actually do it in form view. So that's the next section, sorting and editing records. Now we'll look at how to sort and edit records in a table via form. Because don't forget, once a form has been created, the whole point of a form is so that we can actually enter records, but we need to be able to edit records as well. Now we know that we can do that in a table via Datasheet View. We can add new records down along here, and if I was to add a new record here, and once I get to the last field, and if I tabbed on to go onto a new record or new row, or if I clicked on any other record, then the record in this row that I had just entered would be automatically saved or committed to the database. And of course we can sort and filter in the same way as we do in tables as well. Now doing it in Datasheet View in a table is fine, but the whole point of forms is that it just makes it a little bit more user friendly. So I'm going to close down the mailing table and open up the addresses form that we've created. and I can see that the first, there is a, I'm just going to remove the sort. There was a sort in it, so I've removed the sort. And I'm the first entry in it. I'm record 1 of 17. If I open up the mailing table, see, there I am, 1 of 17. So this and this are the same thing. The form is just another way of looking at the records that are in the mailing table. Just want to kind of reinforce that concept. Our views down here are very useful for moving between the various different views. We have 4 different views: form view, datasheet view, layout view, and design view. Form view is what people are going to see when they're using the form to put in entries into the mailing table. I'm going to go to record number 4. So I'm going to type in the number 4. You could use the navigation buttons, but I'm going to click on the current record box down here and type in the number 4 and press enter. And I can see that it's somebody called Ali Rampuri. If I double left click on mailing, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4. Ali is the 4th record, or the 4th row or entry in the mailing table. So make sure that you're able to kind of navigate around using either the record navigation buttons or typing in the number directly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new record. So I'm going to add a new record by clicking on the new blank record button, and I'm going to type in the following: Darren Jones. And I'm going to say that Darren is in the finance department, and again I'm going to put in his address as, not the town, I'll just put in Dillon Street again, and again I'm using the tab key to move down through the fields. It's just quicker than left clicking on the fields. I'll type in Clonmel, Tipperary, and again I'll just type in 4 zeros for the postcode. It doesn't matter what the postcode is. Once I click onto the next record, that's it. Darren has now been saved. If I click on previous record, I can see Darren Jones, and if I open up the mailing table, I can see that Darren has now been added and is at the top of the table. So now we know that we can add, and we can also remove. We'll be seeing how to do that shortly. Actually remove or delete records as well. I'm going to move to the last record, and I'm going to do that in the addresses form, because this is a forms chapter after all. So I'm going to move to, again, your first record button is down here, your last record button is here. So the last record that I just added was Darren Jones. I want to now delete him, so I can do it from the forms view. I can left click on the delete button. Now don't click on delete, because what that will do is it will delete whatever field or object you have selected over here. As you can say, delete will delete the item that you currently have selected, but I don't want to do that. I want to delete the entire record. So if I left click on the down button, or the down arrow beside delete, and click on delete record, I get a dialog box saying you're about to delete one record. You have to be sure, because once you do delete a record, you don't get it back. So if I click yes, Darren is now gone from the mailing table. I can open it up and we can see that there is no sign of Darren. He's now gone. And that's all there is to deleting records via form view. Now, one of the slight disadvantages of forms when you're looking at records via forms is that you might have to navigate through until you get to the record that you want. Whereas when you're looking at records like this in a table in Datasheet View, unless the table was very, very, very long with hundreds or thousands of entries, this is a very short table. So I could see, for instance, Eileen. I can immediately go to Eileen here, and I could either right click on her row selector and delete record, or I could do it the way I just did it there a minute ago in form view by clicking on the down arrow next to delete and going to delete record. So because you're able to see multiple records at the same time, you might be able to instantly jump to whoever. Whereas when you're doing it in form view, you might need to navigate through. For instance, Eileen is record 11 of 17. So if I was at the last record, I'd have to click back to go to 11 of 17. That's why sometimes it's useful then to know what record number somebody is, because you can just type in the number down here and be taken to her immediately. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit some information for Eileen. So I'm going to edit her town. I'm going to pretend that Leeds is incorrect and that she's not in Leeds and that she's instead in, let's say, Sheffield. So the only way to do it, and very easy way of doing it, is to simply backspace, go down to the field, backspace, delete what's in there, and type in the actual town name, which is Sheffield, or whatever it is. Now how do we save that? Well, again, you don't need to save it in the traditional sense. The second we go on to the next record or the previous record, don't forget I've changed it from Leeds to Sheffield. If I click on the next record, and if I go back, I can now see that Sheffield is still in there. It was saved, it was committed to the database. So that's all there is to editing. You just go to whatever record you want, you click, and then let's go back to, or let's go up to Lotus. Perfect. And let's change the postcode from 8JU to 8JY. No idea if that's valid, it probably isn't, but it doesn't matter. Again, I changed it from 8JU to 8JY. If I go on to the next record, and now if I go back to the previous record, you can see it's still 8JY. So it's very easy to actually edit records and to delete records as well. We can sort as well when we're in form view. We can apply a sort. We've already seen how to do sorting in tables in our sorting and filtering chapter. If I have a table open, I simply click in the column that I want to sort by. I don't need to select the entire column, I just click in the column and then I click on either ascending or descending. But if I'm in form view, I don't have columns. All I need to do is click on the row, the field for that particular record. So if I wanted to sort this entire table based on, for instance, address 1, I simply click in the address 1 field and I click on ascending. And now you can see that everything has been moved around. Andrews High School, the record that has Andrews High School as its address 1 is the first one because this is ascending. And then Australia College, Chaps Grammar School, Copper, C, D, and so on and so forth. I could also left click on town, let's say, and then I could sort it on descending. So if I click on descending, now Wrexham, because we're starting from smallest, or if you like, in reverse alphabetical order, we're starting from Z. Now we don't have any Z's, but we're going back to W. That's going to be the first one, and so on and so forth. So you can also sort from within a form as well, which is very, very useful. The final thing that we'll look at is the search box down here for editing and sorting records. So if I click on the search box down here, I can type in text or a term that I want to find within any record, within any row in the database table. So if I type in the following, Clonmel, you can see that before, it's like predictive text, it immediately starts to look for and finds what I'm typing in. And it's found Clonmel in my record in 16 of 17. Or if I delete that and type in, let's say, Pagnell. Sorry, I typed it in there. I should be typing it in the search box. Pagnell. You can see that it's found Pagnell in address 2. So it will automatically, you don't even need to finish it and you don't need to hit the enter key. The second you start to type, if I type in, are there any Johns? No, there's no Johns. It's found JO, so it looks for part of it as well. If I type in Eileen, did we type in? Yeah, Eileen Sanderson. So it immediately starts to look for and immediately takes you to that record. So it's very, very powerful and very, very fast. So that's it. That's all there is to this section, which is sorting and editing records. In the next section, we're going to look at how to filter records. Now, again, we've looked at filtering as well in our sorting and filtering chapter. We just looked at how to apply sort. In the next section, we're going to look at how to apply a filter. Except this time, we're going to be applying the filter via form view. And we'll look at the two different types of filters that we can apply. We'll look at how to filter based on one field, and we'll look at how to apply a filter based on multiple fields. So I'll see you in the next chapter for filtering in a form. Now we're going to look at how to filter in a form. And you can kind of look on this as an alternative to querying, because it's useful for getting instant answers rather than going to the trouble of setting up a query and saving it. Now we saw that queries are better, they're more appropriate, they're more efficient, they're more flexible, but if you want an immediate answer, sometimes filtering is fine, and if you're not too worried about needing to come back to it. And there are buttons on the toolbar to help. Let's look at how it works from scratch. There's nothing here that we're doing that we haven't done before, by the way. We did filtering when we did searching and filtering, the searching and filtering chapter. We're now simply filtering, but we're applying a filter in a form instead of out in our table. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to open up the Geography 1 database, and that has two tables, country and regions, and it has a form as well, which we always ignored before because we weren't ready to look at forms. But now I'm going to open up the form. It's called country form. And we can see that it's basically a form that somebody has designed for entering records into the country table. So if I open up the country table, you can see that it has a country field, region field, capital field, and so on. And in the form, country, region, capital. So they've included all the fields on the form. And I could navigate through all 47 records down here like this. I could go to the last record, I can go to the first record, or if I wanted to, I could click on new blank record and start putting in information. We won't do that, we'll just apply a filter. So to do that, I'm going to go to a specific record. I'm going to click down here in the current record box, and I'm going to type in the number 8, and I'm going to press enter, and I'm taken to the 8th record, which again, if I open country, you'll see is Canada. So I'm in the Canada record, North America, Ottawa, and I can see that its currency is set to dollar. So remember, when you're filtering, you have to filter based on a specific value or a specific piece of text in a field. I'm going to filter based on the currency field. If I left click on the currency field, remember the sort and filter group is on the home tab. And there's a selection button. If we left click on that, what Access does is it looks at the value in the field that you're in the current field. And it uses that value or that text as its kind of baseline, as the decision on what to filter it on. It's going to filter it on whatever is in this field. And we can either equals, we can return records where the term in this field equals this, where it doesn't equal this, where it contains this, or it doesn't contain this. So records basically where it's the same as this, where it's not the same as this, or where records where it contains this word, so something dollar, let's say, or dollar something, or it doesn't contain dollar at all. We're going to go equals dollar. So in other words, we're looking for records who have their currency field set to dollar. And we get 4 records. That's all we have. And I can navigate through the records down here like this by clicking on the forwards and backwards buttons. You can see that my table has now been filtered as well, because the filtered button is applied here, or is illustrated down here. I can toggle the filter on and off. So if I click on toggle filter, that turns off my filter. Now it says unfiltered down here. You could also click to filter the records by using the last saved filter. That would turn back on the filter. And you can do it up here as well. So you can toggle the filter on and off. So now it's off. You can see I've got all 47 records. If I toggle it on, now I've only got 4 records. So that can be useful for when you want to quickly flip between it. That's different though from turning the filter off and removing it completely. And it's always advisable to remove a filter after use, because you might get weird results if it's applied again inadvertently, which sometimes can happen. So to turn the filter off completely, I'm going to click on Advanced, and I'm going to click on Clear All Filters. And that's it. The filter is now gone. And that's one of the disadvantages of filters, in that once it's gone, it's gone. It's not like a query which would be saved over here, or if I had created another filter and then I couldn't go back to the filter before that. So but it's handy for getting quick results. So just to again quickly go over that, I went to record 8 and I filtered it based on the dollar field. So I just went up to selection and I went to equals dollar, and I only got 4 records. Why did I go to record 8? I could easily have gone, I'm going to turn off the filter again. I could have just started on the first record, and the currency is set to Afghani for Afghanistan, but I could have deleted that and typed in dollar. And then I could have gone to selection, and it will look for, look for text containing, or look for text that doesn't contain whatever I've typed in. I'm going to say equals dollar, and again I get 4 records. The only reason I did that, or that I went to record 8, is that I knew that record 8 had the dollar value in it. So that's the only reason I did that. But you don't need to do it. So that's it. I've now just going to make sure there are no filters. No, there are clear all filters is gone, and toggle filter is gone. So that means that there are no filters applied. See, no filter down here. There is no current filter, and there's no facility for going back to it. I'd have to create it from scratch. All right, let's see. Let's now look at how to filter based on more than one field. We did that in the searching and filtering chapter, in fact. What we did was we filtered on multiple fields, multiple criteria, and we can do the same in a form. Now the terminology can get a bit confusing here, because we saw that filter by form is an option under the advanced menu, and we're filtering by form in a form. Okay, so don't get confused between the 2 types of forms, although it doesn't really matter, but I just wanted to highlight the distinction. Let's see how we can do it. It doesn't matter what record I'm in or on. I'm simply going to left click in advanced, and I'm going to go to filter by form. And this is where it can get confusing. It looks the same, but don't forget now, this is the filter by form on the country form. And I need to now start specifying what fields I want to filter by. I'm going to go down here to language, and I'm going to type in English, and then in the density field I'm going to type in the following. I'm going to say, let's see, greater than 10. So if I open up my country table just to show you, density is a number that's typed in for each record. I'm assuming it's a population per square mile or something. So I'm essentially looking for records or countries where the language is set to English and where the density is greater than 10. So how many will we get back? I don't know. We need to apply this filter now, or these filters. It's really just one filter with two criteria. So remember, this is filtering by form. So how do we apply it? Well, we click on Advanced, and we left click on Apply, Filter, Sort. And we get back 5 records. I'm getting back 5 records. And again, we can navigate through those. You can see that my table is now filtered. I can toggle the filter off. I'm back to 47 records, or I can toggle it back on. So that's all we did. We went to Advanced, Filter by Form, and you can see the current filter by form is looking for records that have a density of greater than 10 and a language that's set to English. This would be, in query parlance, this would be an example of an AND query, because both this and this have to be true, or have to be met. Both of those requirements have to be met before I get any records back. In this very last section, we're going to look at printing from a form and also how to delete a form. I'm going to double up with those two because it's very, very short. A form is designed to be viewed on screen, we know that, and most of the time we're going to be using forms on screen. In fact, all the time we're going to be using the form on the screen. There'll be very few occasions, to be honest, when you're actually going to need to print a hard copy. Yes, we'll be printing out tables sometimes, and you'll often be printing out the results of queries and reports especially as well when we go to look at reports in the next video. Very seldom will you need to print a form because they're designed to be used on screen. But sometimes, every now and again, you might need a hard copy, so it's very easy to do if you do need one. Here I have the country form still open from the last section of the video, and what I'm going to do is click on File and click on Print. And again, with Access, we always have Quick Print, Print, and Print Preview. I'm not going to actually print this, but I will click on Print Preview to give you an idea of, it can be messy when you're printing out forms, because it's not just going to give you one form or one blank form with nothing in it. It's going to give you all the records in the table in their own form. So this is going to come out on quite a few pages, probably 8, 9, possibly 10 pages. Yeah, 10 pages for the 47 records. So that's quite a lot. So we're not actually going to print that. There are things we can do here. We can change from portrait to landscape. We can change the size of our page. We can change the margins. All stuff that we've done in Word as well, and in Excel too, and in PowerPoint. We can zoom out, of course. We can look at 2 pages at the same time, or we could look at 4 pages. We could even look at more. We could look at 8 pages. But we don't need to do any of that. Just to make you aware that you can actually print a form, although it might be seldom enough that you'd actually need to do it. Let's look at how to actually, when we do go into the print dialog box, if I click on print, again, this is stuff that we should know already from Word and Excel and PowerPoint. They may ask you to specify the number of copies. Where would you click? Well, the same box that you would always click, the number of copies box, and we can use our spinners to go up and down, or we can type in the number directly. So I would get then 10 copies of this, which would come out of quite a lot of pages. That would be like 100 pages because there's already 10 pages in this. But if you needed it, that's how you do it. I'm just going to put this back to 1. You might also want to only print out maybe certain records or certain pages. So if I only wanted the first 4 pages, I could click on the Pages radio button, and then I could type the number 1 in the from box, and in the to box I could type in the number 4 or 5 or whatever it was, and I would only get that number of pages. So that can be useful too. You might also want to print out only certain forms or certain criteria. You might want to apply some criteria to forms and only print out certain records and certain forms containing certain records. So if this reminds you of filters, then it should, because that's exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to apply a filter and only print out the records based on that filter. So to do that, I'm going to go back to the first it should say Asia actually. I'm just going to save that, and what I'm going to do is go back to the first record, and I'm going to left click on the region field, and I'm going to click on selection, and I'm going to say equals Asia. So remember, our selection will filter based on the text that's in the particular field. So we can be equals, doesn't equal, contain, or does not contain. I'm going to go with equals. So I should only get back 6 records. And yes, I only get back 6 records because those are the only countries in Asia that are in this table. So now if I click on File and Print, and if I go to Print Preview, you should see that this only comes out on, should come out on 2 pages. So here's the first 5, and then yeah, there's the 6th one on page 2. So that can be extremely useful as well if you only want to print a certain subset of records from the table. You can apply a filter to it, as I have done here, and then we can actually print out, and only the filtered records will be actually printed out. Okay, so that's useful too. We could sort, of course, as well. I'm going to remove the filter. I'm going to click on Advanced and clear all filters, and I could sort based on ascending or descending, and then I can click on File and Print, and it will be printed according to that sort. Okay, so as you can see, I've sorted it now in alphabetical order, descending. So USA is first of all, and then backwards. So that can be quite useful too, depending. And you can sort your filtered as well. So if I was to filter, let me go back to, I'm going to take off the filter, and let's say I'm going to send that region, and I'm going to left click on region, and I'm going to click on equals Asia again. So now I only have 6 records, and country, I'm going to sort it in descending order. So now I'm only printing countries that are in Asia, and I've sorted them in descending order. So if I go to File and Print Preview, you can see that Russia is the first country, and then so on and so forth. So that's pretty much it for printing from a form. That's all we need to know. That's all we need to know. Now, deleting a form. How would you delete a form? Well, it's the same as deleting a table. It's the same as deleting a query. It's going to be the same for deleting a report when we look at reports in our next video, and it's the same for forms as well. There are a number of ways you can do it. You can left click on the object in question, and you can go to, on the Home tab, you can go to delete. And what that will do is it will delete this item, whatever item you've currently selected. You can right click on the object in question in the objects pane, and you can left click on delete. You can also left click once on the object in question, and you can press the delete key on your keyboard, which I will do now. Now I'll be told that I can't delete it because it's still open. Remember, you cannot delete an object while it's still open at Access. Access won't allow that. So what you need to do is you need to close down the object. Now what I can do is I can use any of those methods at all. I'll use this one. I'll left click once on it, and I'll click on the delete button. You'll always be warned, it will say, do you want to permanently delete it? If you click yes, you won't be able to undo it. That's very important. Once you delete an object, it's gone, you don't get it back. See, the undo button is grayed out, so there's no way of going back in that. So you really need to make sure that you do want to delete an object before you delete it, because otherwise you'll have to create it again. That's it. That's the end of the forms video. There are 2 revision exercises at the bottom. You'll see them in the show more, in the video description. Just click on the show more link, and you'll see the 2 revision exercises downloadable as PDFs. So work through them. And in the next video, which will probably be online probably early next week, I would say Monday or Tuesday at the latest next week, we will look at reports, and it will probably be roughly the same length as this video, maybe a little bit shorter. It depends. Again, a little bit fiddly, but not difficult to do. And then that's it. We're done with Access. So if anybody has any questions or problems, or if there's anything you're not sure of in this section or any of the other sections, please drop me a line. Best of luck with this material, and I'll see you very, very soon for the final video, and that will be section 8 reports.